All right, how's it going, everybody? Back again. I'm Jay here on the Auto Coffee channel, doing another live coffee Q&A on Practical Brewing with, what are we using? We're going to be using this, the Beehouse dripper today. And what is the Beehouse and how is it different than the V60? I mean, in general concepts, they're all pour over. So basically, you're going to have the holder, you're going to put the coffee, the filter, then the coffee, and you're going to pour water through it or over it in order to brew the coffee. Now, how do they differ? So this is the Hario V60. As you can see, there's a big hole here in the center, and it has these vortices, I guess what you call them, that supposedly channels the water, and it also, the ribbing keeps the filter paper off of the sidewall so that there's theoretically some space for the water to flow around or the brewed coffee to flow around. On the Beehouse, this one's a little bit different in the fact that it has ribbing. But unlike the V60, the ribbing doesn't go all the way to the top of the brewer. But more importantly, what's really nice about this one that I like better, that's really overexposed. Hang on a moment. Let me just, there we go, that's a little better. It has two holes here in the bottom, and they're much smaller than the V60, right? What this means is that you can now control the flow of the water through the coffee much easier, right? Because it's smaller orifices, less flow, right? Coffee will flow through the path of least resistance. So the larger the hole, the less the resistance. The smaller the hole, the greater the resistance. And what do I like about these is that, with the Hario V60, you can cheat if you want. And what I mean by that is that there was a really famous coffee company that was doing this, where they would take the V60 and instead of just using your typical coffee ratios, they would boost that ratio by double or more. And what they would do is that they would boost that the amount of coffee and then pour through it in about a minute. Mainly because they wanted to, be able to process a lot more people in line in a commercial environment faster. And so it was kind of like, well, why would you do that? And this will allow you to do that. If you want to go with that style of brewing, you most certainly can do that with this. And this is the ideal one to do it. But because it allows so much flow through, when you're teaching new baristas, or if you're learning how to brew coffee, you really have to have good control over your water flow and dispensing in order to really control the coffee and make a nice one. So the nice thing about the Beehouse is that it already does that for you, and you don't have to worry so much about restriction. Now, what does that mean? You can use regular filter paper, and you can also use maybe even slightly coarser of a grind. Now, what the thing about grinding is, and we always talk about like fine or medium or whatever, or super fine or medium fine or coarse. The whole thing about grind size is the whole thing about brewing is to have the right water to coffee quantity ratio. You want to have the right temperature of water for extraction. And in many respects, there's no truly right temperature. It's kind of more what's right for your situation. Like I said in the last broadcast, you can go with very coarsely ground coffee and have very long extraction times. And the extreme would be to be cold brew, so cold water with coffee, and then you extract that for 12 plus hours, and that will give enough time. So coffee is very soluble in water. It will release its solubles into water or into most any liquid. All you have to do is have it enough time. And why do we heat it up? When we heat it up, you can go faster. So instead of having to wait 12 hours for a cold brew, you can wait 4 minutes for a pour over. That's really in a nutshell the whole thing. Now, where does grind size come into play? Now, if we look at these two, right? we've got big hole, 2 small holes. Flow rate will be different between the two. So ostensibly, we can go for a coarser ground, slightly coarser, not coarse, but coarser ground here than here, because we want, because now we've got so much more flow through, we want to create more resistance to the water as it flows through the coffee. All right, but we're going to use the Beehouse today because I like this. So the Beehouse is made in Japan. It's a ceramic and has these little windows, right? See these little windows? So when you set this on top of your, if I had a cup to set it on top of, when you set it on top of your cup, right? The nice thing is, one of the problems is when you're brewing, especially, well, in any environment, if you have like a ceramic or something that's solid and you set that on top and you're not using a glass like this, you really can't see what's happening. You're just kind of, going with the, you're just kind of going by faith. Or unless you're using a scale, then you know what's going on. But I like to be able to look at the brew and see what's going on in the cup. And these little windows allow you to do that. See how I can see now beyond that. So I'm just going to look down there as I'm brewing every once in a while, not in a continuous manner. And this reminds me, I do need a cup. No matter how much you might prepare for the live stream, there's always something that I'm forgetting. All right, so like I mentioned before, this is made in Japan. This one was actually used at the Spro Hamden for many years, and it's actually a little bit damaged. So I don't really know how it's going to do. Like you can kind of see this little crack here. It is a cracked. I don't know if we dropped it or something. But it'll probably leak slightly. We're going to find out. Anyway, so these use basic Melita style filters, as you can tell by the wedge shape, right? There's a wedge shape here. So we're going to sort of place this on top of the mug. We've got our typical Melita filter. We're going to fold that over. I like to fold over the seams. And I actually like to fold it opposite. Why? I don't know. I just think it'll sit flatter, sit better without having too much of a bump here. Not that really the bump will make any difference. And today's coffee, we're going to use a coffee from a company called Bad Habits. Bad Habits is, oh no. I'm afraid I have forgotten where Bad Habits is from. This was given to me by some friends, and I'm very grateful. Cajamarca, Peru. So we have notes of dark chocolate, walnut. What else does it say here? Maple and red ripe fruit. Ripe red fruit. So we're going to measure these out. And so for our brew today, we're going to measure out 24 grams because we're going to make a 12-ounce cup. Again, the basic ratio that I like to use is 2 grams of coffee for every finished ounce. So if I'm making a 12-ounce cup, 24 grams. If I'm making a 10-ounce cup, 20 grams. If I'm making 128, well, if I'm making 64 ounces or half a gallon, 128, right? So on and so forth. It's really a great basic tool for you to use when you're thinking about how do I measure the amount of coffee. And so 24 grams is roughly 3 generous tablespoons of coffee beans. So if you don't have a scale and you want to measure out on your own, that's a great way to do it. I'm going to measure out here on our Breaking Bad scale. All right, I have it all set up for the right amount of weight. And then we're going to grind it to, this time we're going to grind kind of medium. Now, here's one of the things that you might want to consider. Like we talk about grinders, people love to talk about grinders. This is the Compact R80, and it's a commercial store grinder, 80 millimeter burrs, flat burrs that are It's a great grinder. Works great. It's a workhorse. I've had actually this one. I've had this for 13 years, and it just doesn't want to die. Like there's some wonky things with it, but it just won't die. These Spanish guys, they make good grinders. Anyway, so here's the thing. As your grinding disc lives on, as with anything that's sharp, it'll become dull or it'll change its profile, right? Like you can't use a kitchen knife forever and expect it to be the same sharpness. Same goes with your grinders. And so as your burrs wear, the actual setting changes. So on this grinder, we can actually change the orientation of the nub to match these numbers. Or in this case, they have, sorry about that, I have the door open and there's a lot of trucks that roll by sometimes. Anyway, so on here, it's got, it says, fine, coarse, medium, fine. And now you can adjust that depending on where the burrs happen to be in their life cycle. Hoon! What's going on, Hoon? How are you? Good to see you. How's everything going in Tucson? And every once in a while, you have to adjust. So really, what it says here may or may not necessarily be accurate to that day or that moment. And this is something where in the professional world, like if I'm at Spro, we're grinding, 100 coffees a day. So you have the opportunity to see the performance of the grind. And so what I'm leading up to is that as you select the grind and you brew your coffee, like the ideal way to brew coffee, let's say we're doing 24 grams of coffee, 350 milliliters of water to make a 12-ounce cup of coffee. We want that coffee to finish brewing in 3.5 to 4 minutes. And that's kind of the gauge that I will use to look at how the grind setting is, right? So let's say I brew one day, or one brew, and while I can do this in multiple brews, like in 20 minutes, it may take you at home, several days to do this because you probably don't want to sit there and brew 7 coffees in a row at a time and, and only be yourself drinking. That would be kind of a waste. So what we'll do is we'll grind and we'll brew. And if it's hot there. Oh, sorry. It's hot. Oh, yeah. I hear you. It's pretty hot here. Not as hot as your place. Now, what was I? Oh, so we're going to have the coffee. And we'll brew it, and we'll see how does it perform, right? How did that grind perform in our brew at that time? And then the next one, we may make an adjustment, right? So, for example, if it's going too fast, we may want to fine up the grind to create more resistance to the flow of the water that will lengthen our exposure, our water and coffee exposure time. If it goes too slow, like if we start to push 4.5, 5+ minutes, we're going to want to coarsen that grind up so that the flow rate becomes faster. And you can correlating with that is also going to come with tasting your coffee, right? Like if it goes fast or slow, but you like the flavor, you like that coffee experience, stay with it. Don't worry about what everybody else has to say. The important thing about coffee drinking is that it's your personal pleasure, right? Like at Spro, we would offer multiple brewing methods, and we could tailor the way we brew the coffee. I mean, if you were that sophisticated, a customer, a guest, we could tailor that brew to what you liked. Because really, it's all about your personal flavor. It's your personal experience. All the gurus in the world can tell you all kinds of stuff, but like everybody can tell you, do this exact method. But what if you don't like what the flavor's like? That's not good. And those will be from people that tell you this is the best way to do it. Forget the best. Go with what you like. So we're going to grind this coffee up. Oh, by the way, I wanted to say thank you to everyone that's commented, especially in the replay comments. And one of our commenters, I appreciate you writing to me because he said that, hey, he was basically saying that your camera sucks, your audio sucks. Okay, thanks for letting me know. I really do appreciate that, because honestly, I don't get to always watch the live streams again. So I didn't really know how this one performed. Just to give you a little basic background of what I'm doing here is I'm actually using a pretty sophisticated camera that I'm still learning how to use, right? There's so much functionality in this camera. It's called the Sony FX30. And it's running a pretty decent microphone, the Sennheiser MKE600. And there's a whole audio section that I really have to learn more of. It's not, despite this being the camera that I'm using right now, it's not my primary camera that I'm shooting the other videos with. That's a much smaller compact camera. Actually, it's this camera here, the one that you're watching there. And another limitation that I'm running into with this particular live stream is that, as you can see here, I'm running it on StreamYard. And StreamYard, the channel doesn't make that much money, so it's StreamYard free, which has a limitation of 720p instead of the 1080p streaming that we would prefer to have. So I was watching the replay from Friday just a little while ago, and I was like, ooh, yeah, we need to work on something. So maybe we'll bypass StreamYard and go straight into YouTube. But it'll take a couple more episodes for me to work those out. Oh, and Rusty's here. What's going on, Rusty? How are you, man? Good to see you. And Hoot says, looks great. Oh, thanks, Brewer. I appreciate that. And Hoot is still using the phone. I don't know if I told you this, but I'm also friends with another YouTuber by the name of Steve Dudaklian. And he runs a channel called Vito's Leatherworks, where he does shoe repair. And I just got some shoes from him the other day. I was just down there. He's still on his iPhone. I just love it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I love that. I just love how you guys are just using iPhones. I think it's a fabulous way to go. Sometimes if I'm doing a live stream from the roastery, there's a couple times I've done it from the roasting space where we're actually roasting. I've actually used the iPhone for that. But I will admit my iPhone is starting to get a little bit long in the tooth. Like it's an iPhone 10. And one of the problems I've come into, and even though when I was away, I had someone replace my battery, and I asked them to clean it, but the camera here, the front-facing camera, has a little bit of dust in it, so it looks like hazy. So I'm like, oh, I need to do something about that. What's going on, Dan? How are you, man? Good to have you. Thank you very much for tuning in. All right, so let's go back to it. We're going to waste our time here talking about tech. All right, so I have this scale. Let me put the apparatus on the scale. So the scale itself, with all the apparatus weighs 782 grams. Oh, you can't really see that, can you? You can't see that. This is not ideal, is it? All right, I'm going to have to keep working. Oh, gosh. This is much better the other day. All right, pull this way. Okay, so that's better, right? All right, so you can kind of see if I can zoom in a little bit more. Okay, so you can kind of see now what does it say? There we go. You can see now the weight so that we can get well with this. We're also going to get our timer. I'll put that down here as well. Sorry, it's not my whole setup here is a little bit janky. Oh, sorry, you're going to get seasick now. All right, now we're just going to get our hot water together. And I'm using this Kalita gooseneck with the pelican-shaped beak. This style of kettle was actually designed by my personal coffee hero, a guy named Ichiro Sekiguchi, who owned Cafe del Hombre in Tokyo, Japan. And he designed this because he's just a psychotic, right? He's so psychotic about everything. And I don't know why I gravitate towards psychotics in coffee or in pretty much any kind of pursuit. I tend to gravitate towards them. All right, so we're gonna take some water, pour it in here. Like he was just basically that kind of guy that was so into coffee, and he was so unhappy with what was available that he just had to like make his own. All right, so we're gonna start this process. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do about 80 grams or so just to pre-wet the coffee for the first 30 seconds. There. Now, why do we pre-wet? We pre-wet because we want to, let the coffee get wet and do some blooming, especially if it's super fresh, right? Like if it's super fresh, you want to bloom. If it's not super fresh, maybe it won't bloom. And maybe this is not so super fresh anymore. I probably picked this up in February. The reality is that I just have tons of coffee lying around here. But it takes me a while to, sometimes it takes me a while to get to, and sometimes it takes me a while to go through. Like I have some coffee that I still am planning to do a video about that I got over a year ago now. Don't worry about that. That stuff's frozen. All right, so back to the brew. Now we're just going to hold it up. As you can see, I've just lifted it just slightly, the coffee bed, and really my intention is just to kind of hold it there. Now remember, we're looking to finish between 3:30 and 4 minutes. One thing I don't really like about the pour over is that it takes continuous, attention. So in a cafe environment, no big deal because, we've got our baristas and everybody's working, and that's what we're doing. But, when you're at home, like making breakfast, or just you want to make coffee and you want to work while you're doing that, this does require a lot of attention. And I don't know, sometimes I don't like that. All right, 2:46 in 2 minutes. And it is hot in this room right now. $281. We're at 223. Now, as you can see here, I hope you can see it. The coffee that had been kind of floating on the top has kind of fallen. And now we just kind of have like a little bit of water on top of the bed of coffee. 309, 316, 329. Now we're 3 minutes now. I'm going to hit it all the way to 350. $351. There we go. That's good. All right, so that's our brew, and it's going. Hopefully, it should finish in the right amount of time. Ooh, there's no place. There is no place for me to put myself. That's a terrible location. So is that, and that too. I'll hop there for the moment. All right, so now it's flowed through in 3 minutes, 40 seconds. That. Now, this particular mug is a little bit large. It's actually 14 ounces, but I'm going to hit it with a little bit of water because I want a little more volume. And here's the thing. It's perfectly okay to do that. Your brew ratios are rated to a certain volume, right? So if I'm talking 24 grams for 350 milliliters, I can add just a little bit more. I wouldn't add multiple ounces more, but a little bit more is fine. Uh-oh. What is going on with this? I don't know if you can see me still, but it looks like on my end I have frozen. And Dan says, I hear you. Freezing is the best option to preserve beans, but not perfect. Have you ever tried argon gas? I'm curious to give it a try since we have trouble getting through coffee in time. This is a great question. And actually, I do have some argon sitting around here in the form of those wine canisters. And why are we frozen? All right, if we are still frozen, hopefully you're still receiving this. Hopefully we're still broadcasting. Oh, we are not broadcasting. Are we out of something here? Hello. Well. Okay, my apologies. All right, hang on 1 second. Sorry about this. Let me just adjust something here. All right, hello. Everything will go. But hold on a second. All right, back to vlogging style. So they say in the world, let me just adjust. All right, they say in the world of YouTube live streaming, something's going to go wrong, and something has gone wrong. I don't know. Basically, the camera has just frozen. I've never seen that before. Anyway, so our coffee. Let's go back here. I don't know if we went over what Dan said. I don't know, but I'll repeat it again. So Dan says, I hear you. Freezing is the best option to preserve beans, but not perfect. Have you ever tried argon gas? I have not tried argon gas in person or yet, but I do have some argon here, so maybe we'll give it a try. I mean, frozen, there's no, I guess in the world of like preservation, like argon, I think will cost a bit of money. I don't know. If I went to the oxygen supply, the gas supply place, I probably could get it relatively cheaper. If you're buying in those Coravon, that's not cheap. But here's the thing with frozen coffees or preservation of coffee, there's no truly one way that's going to be perfect, right? There's always going to be some level of compromise. And, I guess the thing is, the question is to ask is, how much of a compromise are you willing to make to hold your coffee, right? The ideal thing is, of course, both as a coffee roaster, we want to sell you coffee, right? We want to sell coffee as much as we can. And we would prefer you to buy coffee on the regular so that there's always coffee that we can sell and cash flow that we can receive. I don't think anybody really will talk about this in the coffee spheres. But that's really part of the balance, right? The financial part of it. As a consumer, you want to buy coffee that you enjoy and hopefully you find something that's really great and you want to hold on to it and have it, into the future. I think that freezing is a good compromise. There's, in many respects, though, I haven't found a situation where the coffee, let's say you had the coffee and you bought it and it was 7 days out of roast and you froze it and you held it, pretty deeply frozen, like even in your home freezer. You can then, what is it? So if you held it for 6, 7, 8 months, a year, when you thaw it out and you drink it, that coffee really is still held at that point in its life cycle. And it's something that I've been using as a tool, both in professional circles, for our coffee supply at different times. We've done that for, I remember we did tests for 6 months. And one of the things that I really remember the most was that James Hoffman gave me some of his coffee one year. This was back in 2009, April. We were together in April, and he gave me a bag of coffee from Square Mile, and I was like, all right, cool. But I thought, let me take this coffee, we'll take it home and do a test with it. So I took it back to the shop. I cupped it critically, wrote down flavor notes, scores, everything. And then I took that coffee, wrapped up, put it in the freezer. I held in the freezer for 6 months until October of 2009, when I was training our new team for Spur of Hamden. And so I spent like 5 weeks or 4 weeks with my crew, teaching them coffee and also teaching them how to cup and critically assess coffee. And so I gave them, on one of the exercises of us cupping, one of the coffees that I put out was that same coffee from James. And when we looked at the flavor notes from what I had written in April to what they had written in October, they were practically identical. So I think that there is lots of benefit to freezing and very little downside, you know. And actually, I'm working on a test now that's pushing over a year. I took some coffee. Actually, I got some coffee from George Howell last year in 2022, April 2022, when we were in Boston. And I cupped it again, laid it down. And this time I'm planning to bring on some friends that are actual, like, recognized Q graders. The problem is that nobody lives in Baltimore that I would want to bring on. They all live in North Carolina, Guatemala. So getting them to come here has been a challenge. Like, I was going to do this in June and January, but we just didn't have the time. So maybe we'll get it done at some point. But the longer it takes, the more we're going to get to see how well or how badly the frozen thing does. So Dan says, hold me back from trying lots of coffee at once, since I know I can't reasonably enjoy it in time. So here's the thing, the condensation that you're talking about on the beans really is not something to worry about, to be honest with you. Like, basically when we're utilizing the coffee, and that's, you know, of course, if we're in weather like today, here on the East Coast, Mid-Atlantic, it's hot, it's humid, high humidity. So if you have that kind of environment, if you took the coffee out and you put it on your countertop and you let it sit there for an hour, yes, chances are condensation will probably form. However, really the best practice is you get your coffee, you weigh it out into your grinder, and the rest of it you wrap up, put it back right away. That way you grind it, and the grinding, of course, is friction that introduces heat that raises the temperature, so you don't have. I never experienced the condensation. Now, you would probably experience condensation if you let the coffee sit around, but we don't really let the coffee sit around. And I tell you what, you know, I would really encourage you to give it a try. I find it to be very. We keep a number of stuff frozen here, even here, because I can't go through it fast enough. And then there's a whole bunch of other coffees that don't get frozen. And we're going to test those as well at some point. I mean, single dosing does work best. Like, I've got a couple samples from Christopher Ferron and of some of his, what do you call it? The malolactic, not malolactic, but the koji fermentation stuff. And he packaged those in the centrifuge tubes. So I haven't, gosh, that's the one I'm saying was a year ago. I still haven't. I meant to do the video a year ago, and I'm only starting to work on it now. So yeah, there's a lot of videos to come. A lot of coffees to explore. All right, so I guess that's it. My apologies for this technical glitches. We're just having technical glitches all over the place. You know, I do another live stream on Thursday nights, but mostly about cigars, but also about coffee. And I never have all these I don't have these kind of technical glitches. But anyway, people keep calling. All right, so time for me to go. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and I'll be back again maybe tomorrow or soon. So I'm trying to do more of this. I've been watching Hoon, and I'm like, man, I need to probably do more live streams. So there it is. See you next time. Have a great one. Oh.